So this is our subject one, which is our foundations lecture. And I'm going to go into screen share here. And here's what we've got. And let me go into slideshow mode. Okay. Now, one of the things that the problem we have here is when we have these diverse topics of science, art, and religion, they all have different vocabularies, different points of view. And so what we're trying to do here is to set the foundations so that we have a common framework to talk about these things. Now, back when this is really based on this book, The Tao of Physics, which was written in like 75. And if you go back in time then, the scientists, the physicists in particular, were all thinking they're on the verge of ending physics, that they're going to finally learn enough that they'll be able to just wrap up, a couple hundred years of work in what's called physics and have everything done. And it was just at this point in time when this book was written, The Tao of Physics, where he argued that they were going to hit the wall. And in fact, they weren't going to put everything to bed. And that's exactly what happened. And he was in fact arguing that they should look to the East and draw on the different practices in the East, not in the West, to try and address these things, to come up with new points of view, new ways of looking at these things. And it's interesting to me that, because I remember, when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, I was sharing a computer, and I was in my offices where all these high energy physicists were. And so they were all going over to CERN, which is right next to Geneva, and doing these incredible experiments. And they were writing these simulations to check things out and doing calculations. And they were really pumped up. It was just an amazing time to be there. And it just all hit the wall, okay? The experiments haven't come up with anything new for the last 50 years other than this Higgs boson, but the Higgs boson, that was in 2012, the Higgs boson was actually predicted in the early 60s. So it just shows, that nothing's happened. And what's happened with the physicists is that they've been graduating more and more people with degrees in physics. And when you have a school somewhere and you want to say we're doing leading edge stuff, you can start up a physics activity in theoretical physics where they work on what's called string theory. And the reason why it's good to do this is it doesn't cost much. You can hire a couple of faculty. You can say we're doing state-of-the-art work. We're really at the forefront of what everyone thinks is going to be the real great theory to answer everything. But when all is said and done, there's no experiments that you can do with string theory that anyone has come up with yet after 50 years of doing this. And so the thing that sets physics apart from math is the experiments, the data to do these things. And in fact, you'll get into very heated discussions if you bring this up to a physicist who's working in string theory, because they trade great offense at saying, well, what you're doing that isn't based on any observations, okay? But the thing that they're caught up with now is the beauty side of things, that they think that string theory is such an incredibly beautiful theory that's how they judge whether it's viable or not. The question is really, what does beauty have to do with reality? what is really going on here? And yet, you know, that's where we're at today. And I think what you'll see here, especially with what Ron Cowan observed, is we're going to show a way out of this, but it's not going to be the way that lots of these people thought of. So I'm just going to skip through these things. The one thing that we key on here is we seem to find order wherever we look and at every level that we look. So, for example, if we look around us, we see plants and animals and ourselves, and they're all made up of cells of different sorts, living cells. And if we looked at the matter that's around us, the earth and everything else, it's made up of atoms, and the atoms, in fact, make up the cells that make up everything. So there's this first order of cells and then atoms that take care of everything. And then if we look at the atoms, we discover that the atoms have components to them. They have electrons running around and a nucleus. And then if we look at the nucleus, we see that made up of protons and neutrons. And if we look at the protons and neutrons, they're made up of quarks. And if we look at the quarks, they're made up of subquarks. So there's just a natural hierarchy that occurs here. If we go out and look at in the space around us, the hierarchy goes around a planet, and the planets run around a sun. So there's solar systems everywhere, probably 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, and then with probably 80% of them having planets. And then the galaxies themselves are clustered together in certain ways. There's an order there for the galaxies. So at every turn, when we look, we seem to find order, and that's really what people view as an argument that there really is some higher entity, something there that's creating this order. Why should there be this order? You know, and the other thing that's amazing about it is that we seem to be able to comprehend each of these different orders and all of them together. So how are we wired up? How is this even possible that we're able to do this? That's the real mystery that comes down to this. And the East and the West approach this in different ways. So things that we mentioned before, we talked about this dark matter, which makes up 5 times the amount of matter that's out there. Dark matter is 27%, 28% of what's in the universe, and matter is 5%. So this is really far more common, and this is what drives people crazy. And what Ron Cowan observed was that the dark matter is made up of these subnuclear particles called subquarks, and they simply bind to one another. And if enough of them bind to one another, they actually can become sentient. They can actually start to think, if you will, and so forth. And they have 2 types. One is just a very quiescent type that doesn't have any heat or anything energizing it. So they just float around in space, and they form tubes that Ron observed were gigantic. They were hundreds of kilometers long, just all over the place. But if they landed on a planet or a star, there was a lot of heat, and this energized them, and they were no longer quiescent. They became active, and then that led to them doing their thing on the different planets and stars. We talked about this standard model, which this again is 50 years old. There's been no progress on this other than this one thing that's right in the middle here, this Higgs boson. That was the thing that was discovered in 2012. And the thing about the Higgs boson is actually controls the mass of all of the particles there. So if the Higgs boson had no mass whatsoever, the Higgs boson was 0, then everything that we see here would have no mass, which is not what we expect. And right after the big bounce occurred was when this Higgs boson appeared, and the Higgs boson created the mass for all these different things. So it's like a scaling factor. It goes from 0 to the number that they measured in 2012 was, something like 10 to the 14th times the mass of an electron. So it's very massive. But by going to that level, that gave masses to all of these other particles here and so forth. And the other problem that the physicists are faced with doing this stuff is, again, a lot of these people, remember, came out of World War II when there was a big push to develop an atomic bomb and then a hydrogen bomb. And so a lot of the funding for this comes from the military trying to do these things. And the problem that these people have faced is after 50 years, they haven't really come up with anything that would lead to any sort of amazing new weapons, okay? It's, you look at this and you say, well, why would you ever do that? But that's what's underlying the funding for this. And there hasn't been any for all this time. So what Ron had come up with was we have a 26-dimensional space, and we live in 4 space and time dimensions, and the dark matter we talked about lives in a similar subspace, but it's not the same as ours. And then there are these compactified dimensions, 18 of them, that are floating around. So very different hierarchical view than you'll see. And yet this is what should be part of the standard model. It just hasn't, it has to be socialized, popularized, and so forth. So, and then we touched on, the epistemology, the theory of the knowledge, which is really the core of everything here. And the problem is that after 50 years, we have many of these physicists doing work in string theory where there's no data whatsoever to show anything, and this leads them. Many of them become philosophers. They don't know what to say. So we're gonna go back, and we talked about this as having two kinds of knowledge, 2 modes here: a rational and intuitive, to try and have a common framework. And the rational one is the one that derives from experience that we have, and this leads to opposites, which is a useful way of looking at things, or the Buddhists call this relative. But this is where you divide, where you discriminate, where you compare, where you measure, all of these different things. That's rational knowledge. And you then abstract from this because you want to summarize what you're seeing, and so forth. And so that's what we try and do. But the one that's interesting is the intuitive knowledge, where here, this is where the ideas come from what we said, people like Einstein that were very much caught up with thought experiments. So his thought experiments led to some of his very fundamental ideas, but they weren't rational. They were just intuitive. He was just thinking outside the box, and the end result was that he came up with something that people had missed, that was totally obvious in hindsight. So the thing that happens here is this intuitive knowledge is really where Eastern mysticism is very strong. And here we just go and focus on the Zen Buddhists who say that a finger is needed to point at the moon, but we should not trouble ourselves with the finger once the moon is recognized. Or the Taoists that said fishing baskets are employed to catch fish. When the fish are caught, you don't need the baskets. Or if you put out snares to catch rabbits or hares, once you catch the rabbits or hares, you don't need the snares anymore. So the words are employed to convey ideas, but once the ideas are grasped, you can forget the words. And that was the statement we see at the bottom here, that the map is not the territory. So this intuitive knowledge, it comes also about from the Upanishads here. What is soundless, touchless, formless, imperishable, likewise tasteless, constant, odorless, without beginning, without end, higher than the great stable. By discerning that, one is liberated from the mouth of death. So this is where intuitive knowledge takes you, and this is the antithesis of what Western esotericism is. The Buddha, ended up calling this direct experience undifferentiated or undivided or indeterminate suchness. So this is you're not relying on these discriminations or abstractions or all these different classifications that can't come about with rational knowledge. You end up coming up with something that is really far deeper. There's another one here from the Upanishads. There the eye goes not, speech goes not, nor the mind. We know not, we understand not. And so then how would one teach it? That's the crux of it here. And this is why there's a huge mismatch between the West and the East in terms of trying to sort these things out. So what we saw was that physics requires both rational and intuitive knowledge.
Yeah.
And
she has her retirement funds. I can't.
Nina?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Sorry.
Sorry.
My son asked something. I didn't know.
Okay, you want to go on mute? Okay, thank you. So what we have here is that why you put up this picture of the standard model is the standard model seems to work perfectly well within its framework. That is, if physicists want to calculate anything, they can go and use the standard model. And the problem is that they'll come up with answers. The answers are confirmed by experiments. People keep trying experiments to see if there's some problem, but they haven't discovered any problems with the standard model yet. And so they're in a catch-22 situation where they need a totally different new set of observations or data to be able to capture things like this dark matter or dark energy. They have no way of really accounting for it in the framework of the standard model. It's simply not there. And that, again, is what Ron Cowan showed, was the fact that they're actually in a different subspace, and that it requires a totally fresh look at doing things that people have been unwilling to take on. So the other thing that does them in here is that after they gather the data, after they do the theory, they still have to explain or interpret the results. And the interpretation of the results is in many times flawed because you're using English or German or Chinese to explain things, and that's not exactly what you gathered data for, or what you ended up formalizing as a theory. There's a misinterpretation of what you actually had going on here. The push has always been in Western science to root everything in experiments, and the experiments have to be able to be replicated by other people, and that's what happens. And the same thing would happen in the East. That is, that people would meditate, would carry out experiences, and other people would try and go through the same thing, and also come up with the same, or they would clarify and sharpen whatever the experience was. But in both cases, it'll take 10 or 20 years to learn enough to be able to do the experiments in Western science, and similarly in the East, with being able to meditate at this level, to be able to achieve these insights is a huge amount of work. The one exception to this is what the Greeks did, where they simply suppose there were some axioms or fundamental principles, and then tried to deduce from that what was going on. The problem with that is that, how does that relate to reality? But that didn't bother the Greeks. So the other side of things here, the rational knowledge, really seems to be the bulk of the activity, but really it's the insights from the intuitive knowledge that really suggest where to go, what the new directions are, what you would have. So you're walking in the woods, you're on the beach, you're just relaxing, and all of a sudden this insight comes to you about how to go clarify and solve this problem. That falls outside the realm of what would be called rational knowledge. And these sorts of things appear in all kinds of other areas. You can see it in music, for example, or in looking at a work of art, or looking at a sculpture of some sort, or looking at dance. When people are going through some type of dance, you can be just caught up with the incredible beauty of it, and it just takes you to a different level. The problem with all this stuff is always that some people are into it and other people aren't, and you end up with an imbalance like we have now, where the physicists just can't admit that what they're doing seems to have some fundamental problems, even though they would be the first to admit they haven't done anything for 50 years. What goes with this is that we have mathematics here, and this is always the puzzling thing. Mathematics seems to be the natural way to express or to summarize theoretically what's going on with all of these observations. And the problem that we have here is it's in the East. Okay, the view of mathematics is that it's there and it's part of things, but it's really not really a feature of reality itself. That the reality is experienced by the mystic is really completely indeterminate and undifferentiated. That math is an interesting tool, but it doesn't really do everything that you want it to do. Many physicists have struggled with how in the world is math so useful. We saw an example of this before when we talked about this study of symmetry, and in the symmetry we saw that there were large classes of things that would describe symmetry, but then there were these exceptional or sporadic entities that themselves didn't fit into any natural category, and they were part of the study of symmetry. So even in the study of symmetry, you have exceptions or things that are not symmetric in any way. And the natural one was this monster group, which is in 196,883 dimensions. And the monster group, whenever you see anything like this, in the physicists immediately key on what the mathematicians have done, because they found that every time the mathematicians come up with something, by and large, the physicists will be able to find some theory, something that will go with it. And so they're all sitting there waiting. Who in the world is going to come up with some theory that works in 196,883 dimensions? That no one has a clue what it is, but they're all thinking, yeah, there's something there, and it's going to be amazing, and so forth.
Bart,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to share some thoughts that just I've been having while listening to you. And that is of this story that I've always found fascinating, where there was speculation about, how is it possible that, that you would have these indigenous populations around the world, and they'd be doing their thing on the beach, and along would come, some sailboat, with people from somewhere in Europe, and they would invade and overtake this indigenous population, even though there were very few people on the boat and a lot of people in the local population. And how could this be? And part of the answer to that was that this boat could be out in this harbor in front of all of these people, but they had no concept that something like this ship could even exist. And so even though it was there in front of their eyes, they couldn't see it because it was beyond their ability to conceptualize it. And so it was functionally invisible to them. So it for practical purposes, it was a stealth vehicle. And I bring up that story, which I've always kind of found kind of fascinating. Like, are you kidding? Of course they could see them, but they say, well, perhaps not. And so I don't know one way or the other, but the reason I'm bringing that up is that it strikes me listening to what you've been talking about, that that once any individual or group of individuals have conceptualized some form, having that concept migrate to others, like from the mathematicians to the physicists or what have you, in terms of all these different groups that you've been talking about, I don't find that so surprising. What my thinking is that once somebody has that thought and then throws that out into the universe, that now, that concept expands and universalizes itself to be part of the larger framework, and it was, I'm thinking of that also in terms of what you were saying, that hey, these particles behave differently when they're observed or not observed. That the observation or the thought or the throwing the concept out into the universe changes the entire dimension of thinking.
Right. Oh, those are good points. The people have argued that when the Spanish showed up with these ships with these huge sails on them, and the boats were, well, they're not large boats as we would think of them today. They're still larger than what the natives had for boats, and this led to this disconnect. But this is the power of what Ron Cowan did, and what we saw, what we're going to see with Charles Leadbeater and Annie Besant 100 years before, was that they simply spent years learning how to meditate, and then were able to look down into the microcosm or look out into the far reaches of space. And if you went and told this to any physicist, like someone working at CERN, where CERN has multiple billions of dollars and tens of thousands of PhDs there working on what is arguably the most complex machine that anyone has ever seen in history, and you tell them that what Ron Cowan did with, the only reason he needed a paper and pencil was he had to be able to do sketches of what he saw, and they're sitting there with computers out the wazoo and cameras and you name it, and they can't begin to do what he did, or what Leadbeater and Besant did. Okay, at that level you get thrown out. They say, well, you're out of your mind. There's no way that you could do that. And the answer is, as I always say, is, well, I'm not Michael Jordan. I can't do what Michael Jordan did on a basketball court. And that's the nature of this. There's some people that work at this that are gifted, and they pull these things off. And the thing that's amazing about it is that what Ron Cowan observed, what Leadbeater and Bassan observed, predicted in advance all of the things that have been discovered, by the physicists and beyond. So, it's the problem is that people just can't believe this is possible, and like I said, it's impossible for them to go do these things.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
It's done, the thinking, whatever, and then it's out there for that person in meditation or whatever to see or grasp. It's just like with monkeys on islands that they were studying. They threw them food on the island. So the food was in the sand, and the monkeys had to eat the food with the sand. Well, after 2 weeks, one monkey took the food and washed it in the water. Okay, that went across the island, but within a short period of time, monkeys across the world were doing it. They
Right.
didn't see what happened on this island.
Oh.
And they were, fascinated that how did they pick this up? But it goes out, and different ones pick it up.
Yeah, no, that's a good example, Judith. There's a different one, which is after World War II in Britain. There were some birds that, remember, people had milk delivered to them, and the milk bottles had a foil top on them to keep out everything. Well, the birds were smart enough, and they were able to land on the top of the milk bottle and punch through and started to drink the milk, okay? Well, there were a group of birds that did this, and they started to realize there were birds all over England that were doing this, and it started to just spread everywhere. And yet the birds, how did they learn this? It was a couple birds, in one place that did it, and no one has a clue as to how in the world, and then people said, okay, we're going to get rid of milk bottles having that sort of covered, so they couldn't do it anymore. The example here, a lot of the stuff that you see here on what we call group theory, or the study of symmetry, a lot of this work was done in the 70s and 80s, but it was only in around 2000, 2005 that they actually finished categorizing like all of these groups. So they know that they haven't missed any, okay? And the one here that has this number, which is 8 times 10 to the 52nd, 51st power, if you look at everything, is in this 196,883 dimensional space. You need this many numbers to categorize what it's doing. This is what all the physicists have been staring at, wondering, where in the world can we put that into physics? What in the world is it? There's no doubt that it's there. It's just, you're kind of stopped dead in your tracks trying to say, what in the world is this thing? The other side of things, remember, this work was done in the middle 70s is when a lot of this stuff was first discussed in any meaningful way. And so what we have here is science, which is tooting its horn for doing such a great job, and has now realized that it spent 500 years studying 5% of the universe and missed the other 95%. But what happens here is they try to drill down and be more and more precise. The language that's used becomes increasingly detached from the real world. And pretty soon you can't, you have to, if you will, leave behind what you would think of as normal language and adopt a different set of words and a different set of meanings for what's going on. The example that Steve cited of how when you observe something that changes it, that's actually what Ron Cowan showed was false, okay? And especially when we did looked at that double slit, single slit experiment, as far as Western science is concerned, if you shoot electrons through a single slit, you'll just get a line of electrons. And when you shoot electrons through two slits that are side by side, then you get this wave pattern that occurs here. And so the comment was, well, the wave pattern arises because somehow the electrons are actually not particles anymore, they're now waves. And by us observing this, that makes this happen. But if we put another observer in there just looking at each electron, then we get a different experiment. We get a different set of things that happen here. And then the electrons don't make a wave pattern when they go through the two slits. But what Ron Cowan observed was that that's all wrong, that the electron actually is covered with what he called information. And the information is always sending out signals in those compactified dimensions. So it's always scanning everything around it to see what's going on. Is there one slit? Is there two slits? Is there one slit? Is there two slits? Once there's two slits, it immediately becomes a wave. It's no longer a particle. And that's simply due to the rules of the algorithms that are there in the information, okay? Which is an example of how one of the shortcomings that you have with all of this stuff, that people talk themselves into things. And yet, if they were able to observe the way that Ron did, they'd realize that they don't need the kind of crazy language that they made up to explain what's really going on. The other thing to keep in mind here is that you require extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. And so on the one hand, there's so many physicists out there now cranking out so many theories at the drop of a hat, but they don't match data is the problem that they face, and that's always been, one of the problems is one good piece of data is a good way to kill 1,000 different theories that are all inadequate for doing the job. So the bar is very high for trying to explain everything that so far the current scientific paradigm has explained. But if you end up with a fact that's explained by the paradigm, if you have a knowledgeable belief that's not explained by the paradigm, it's dismissed as anecdotal. So as an example of this, way back in the 1920s, there was a chap named Millikan who did an experiment where he put charges on oil drops. So the charges, he had some way of getting electrons to break free so that they ended up on the oil drops. And he was able to see that, therefore, how many, what levels of charges there were on the oil drops. There were a bunch of them that were, they were always integer multiples, of a basic unit, 1, 2, 3 times your basic unit of charge. But there were a bunch more that he just threw out that had 1/3 or 2/3 charge. Those are called quarks. But in the 1920s, no one could believe there was anything other than integer quantities for electrons, and so it was an anecdote. He threw it out. We could have been 50 years ahead of things if he stopped to think about what he saw. A different example here is in the Buddhist side of things. again, what Ron Cowan keyed on was this mind-body problem, this causal relationship between you have your mind and your body. And the Buddhist view says that it's incredibly complicated and probably is linked much more to your soul or your spirit that's linked to your body. And there's this is something that Western science has dealt with. We just haven't got anywhere. But this is the nature of what is at the forefront of what you would call the science of Buddhism. The other side of things that comes up here when we try and deal with mindfulness, meditation, or these unconscious processes, and try and observe them, it seems that there's a chance we can actually understand others as well. And this leads to all of these special properties that we saw in the Yoga Sutras of people being able to actually have capacities for telepathy or for levitation or for the ability to be clairvoyant in different ways. So these are all things that cannot be explained by Western science. And where we closed here was we had Hildegard von Bingen, who is this mystic that we'll come back to much more. And she wrote a poem here, which tries to capture this notion of Western mysticism. This is in 1100 AD. So the earth is to the sun as the soul is to God. The earth at any point can be located by its relationship to the sun. The earth has a scaffold of stones and trees. In the same way as a person formed, flesh is the earth, the bones are the trees and stones. So the soul is the firmament of the organism then. In the manner in which the soul permeates the body with its energy, it causes and consummates all human action. The person that does good works is indeed this orchard bearing good fruit. And this is just like the earth with this ornamentation of stone and blossoming trees. Do you want to say anything? We're gonna come back to her. She was one of her. She had a series of visions that led her to doing this, and she realized that she was being told that she should write. So she wrote these poetry. She wrote books, and then she ended up writing chants. These are among the first Western European chants we have, and in fact, she's the most recorded person of chants that we have out of Western Europe. And we can, I think, hold on one sec. I think I have something on this.
Did you play that in the beginning?
Let me just look here and see. I think. Oh, here it is, here, yeah. So I don't know if you noticed, but there were words there in Latin. She was unusual in that a lot of the Gregorian chants are just no words. You're just going, and she actually wrote words and had you know, a whole series there. You could see a progression, a chord in what we just listened to, and there's a whole bunch of these on YouTube. They're all very pretty. So anyway, now we go back to where we're at.
She's one of my favorite mystics. I'll just say that for now. But we're going to do a whole unit on her because people
Right.
asked for it. So I'm really glad.
Wait.
But she was an artist. She was a scientist. She was a naturalist. She was an executive. She ran an abbey, which was like a business, at the time.
And she was so good at running the abbey that she did 2 more abbeys. So she was running 3 abbeys at once.
That's right. There was one that she was really like known for.
The one in
Right.
Bingham was the
Yeah.
one. Bingham is on the Rhine River. So, okay. Now, when we go to Eastern mysticism, here, this is this direct mystical experience. This is what someone like Ron Cowan or Bruce, you end up never seeing the intellect as their source of knowledge, but they use it to analyze and interpret their personal experience. And so we quoted here from this chap, D.T. Suzuki, the personal experience is the foundation of Buddhism philosophy, in the sense that Buddhism is radical imperialism or experientialism. Empiricism or experientialism, whatever. Let me just check to see. The dialectic later developed to probe the meaning of enlightenment experience. So there's something totally different here from what you would see in the West. This other chap, Joseph Needham, hold on one sec, repeatedly pointed out the empirical attitude of the Taoists in the book that he wrote, Science and Civilization. Bud, can you mute? Hold on, I'm going to mute you. Okay. We just get the feedback. So this empiricism is what made Taoism the real basis of Chinese science and technology. This is where you got gunpowder. This is where you got the printing press. Where there was a lot of astrology there.
Herbalism.
Yeah, the whole notion of acupuncture and how you treat people from medicine. And it wasn't an accident. This was all well thought out. And the early philosophers were very much like Thoreau going off to Walden Pond, but they went there to just meditate upon the order of nature, and that led them to the insights they came up with. So the Zen verses, he who would understand the meaning of Buddha nature must watch for the season and the causal relations. So the real firm basis of this knowledge on experience in Eastern mysticism really gives you a parallel to what the West would call experimentation to build up scientific knowledge. And it's really these Eastern traditions that provide the direct insight that's outside the realm of the intellect and is provided by watching, rather than thinking, and by looking inside oneself through observation.
Would you say that that's really what Einstein was doing when he was doing his thought experiments?
Yeah, but mathematicians, I think musicians, artists, all have this some more than others, this ability to zone out and to be able to draw on this and what they would call thought experiments or intuitive leaps. The thing that we're dealing with here with Taoists is that the temples, the Quan, originally meant just to look. so that their temples are really places of observation. And the Chinese version of Zen, enlightenment is also often referred to as the vision of the Tao, and seen as regarded as the basis of knowing. So the first item in the Eightfold Path, the Buddha's prescription for self-realization, is seeing, is right seeing, followed by right knowing. So there you go. And the seeing plays the most important role in the Buddhist epistemology. For seeing is really the basis of knowing, and knowing is impossible without seeing. And all knowledge has its own seeing, and they're generally united in the Buddhist teaching, and the Buddhist philosophy ultimately points to seeing reality as it is, which I think Bruce has talked to us about this, about the true essence of reality. Seeing is experiencing enlightenment. Then we had this other Yaqui mystic, Don Juan. So my predilection is to see, because only seeing can a man of knowledge know. It shows up in different ways. So,
But he's Native American, right? Central.
Yeah, he's not Eastern. He's so I think Central, South America. But the whole point here is that the Eastern mysticism really comes about through seeing or observing or looking, and so it's very empirical. That you have an incredible sense of the reality around you that you simply don't get before you go through and work at becoming enlightened. You think you see what's going on, but there's really much more to it than that, and that's the power of this. So the empirical approach of the Eastern philosophy, it really does come across as comparable to the observations in science, and the experimental stage in science really corresponds to this activity of meditation, which gives you these direct insights. It's interesting that Michael Faraday, who was one of the great experimentalists in London in the 1810, 1820, 1830 timeframe, he said that nothing is too wonderful to be true if it be consistent with what we see in nature. And in such things as these, experiment is the best test of such consistency. So Faraday was asked by a reporter for a London newspaper about what he had just discovered. He had discovered actually the electromotive force that couples magnetism to electricity, which is why we have electric motors today. And Faraday told them, well, I have no idea if this will ever be useful, but I do predict that one day we'll be taxed for using it. Okay, that's what the reporter left with. So we have, on the one hand, the physicists going through these experiments, that take years to put together, incredible technologies, the brightest of the brightest, and there's teams of these people, thousands of people at CERN, and so forth, and huge amounts of money. And on the other hand, we have the mystics, the Eastern mystics, who are sitting there with observation without any machinery whatsoever. The only reason they need paper and pencil is to write down whatever it is that they want to make notes of for what they achieve through meditation. And yet they end up going better than the physicists. It's clear that as we sit here today, it'll take hundreds of years, if ever, to be able to achieve what these mystics have already achieved. That is, the energies that bind together all of these different particles that they're looking at. The energies are so great that you have to build particle accelerators that basically run around the equator of planet Earth, and that's not going to happen for quite a while. So and so it goes. So, and
But isn't it true that their data is actually catching up to what the mystics have been saying for many
yeah,
years?
they've been trying to catch up to where the mystics,
Right,
but
but the mystics are still ahead. That's what
yeah,
I meant.
they won't catch them for quite a while. And
But they're quote unquote verifying it with
Right.
their instruments
right, they
and
are.
so on as they go along.
Right, right. No, there's only
Like
there's only one
the
story.
periodic tables
Right,
that Besant and Leadbeater were discovering decades before
but before the West.
so-called scientists.
Right, right. So the problem here is, if you want to, the key thing is to repeat an experiment in modern physics, and to do this, it takes years of, you have to go through learning how to go do all these things, and then you could say, yes, I can duplicate your experiment, and you missed this, or I saw everything that you saw, and similarly, to learn how to meditate and have this deep mystical experience also requires, decades of work and training, and there's still no guarantee that you'll be successful at the end of the day. So with that, we go to Buddhism, which is that our original nature is that of the enlightened Buddha, and we've just seem to have lost it. Ron Cowan,
Forgotten it.
yeah, that's a typo. It should be forgotten it. That Ron felt that babies are born enlightened if you just look in their eyes, and then they become traumatized by life and they forget their inner Buddha. And as a different way of saying, the students of Zen Buddhism are asked to discover their original face. A sudden remembering of this face is their enlightenment. And the reality of these things is that the deep mystical experiences really do not occur without long preparation, and the direct intuitive insights are experienced by all of us in our everyday lives. So, we have an example where we're familiar with forgetting the name of a person or a place, and we just can't produce it, even though we're concentrating, like it's on the tip of our tongue and won't come out, and then all of a sudden it comes out. Okay, so that's a little example of what we're talking about here. We touched on the Chinese medicine side of things, where they see these meridians that connect to the different parts of the body, different organs, different activities there, and also the notion of chakras, which Ron Cowan did some observations and felt that you can see 3 core chakras in the body, one more up at the throat, and one in the head where the third eye is. And when Ron looked at these, he felt that they were, in fact, these mind forms, these dark matter entities that were linked to one another to create what you would call to be a soul. And that these things apparently linked up when you were born, when you took your first breath, and they disengaged when you died. So these entities live forever, just like atoms live forever, but they're sentient. They live, and they encompass your spirit. There was a different example here of humor and jokes, that the split second that you understand a joke is the moment that you really become enlightened, because it hits you. That's it's typically the punchline in a joke is you're typically leading up to some event and then going off into some totally different direction, which is what creates the humor. The sudden intuitive insight that was going on there. And everybody knows I told my only joke last year I'd be glad to repeat it if people can't remember it. It's a very simple joke. The guy goes up to the pearly gates, and he gets there and he looks around and he sees a sign that says all men that are dominated by their wives line up here. And he takes a look and he sees this line of men, and this line goes on and on and on over the hill and dale and just out of sight. And it's just incredible how long the line is. And he's looking all around and he sees this other sign, and the other sign says everybody else. And there's one guy is standing there in line. And he goes over and he says, okay, what's the story? And the guy says, I don't know, my wife told me to stand in line here. So with that, you see the issue of, if the Zen especially are into this, and if it were not laughed, it would not be sufficient to be Tao. Okay, they're into these sudden spurts of juxtaposition. So the thing that's different here is the issue of preparing the mind to be open to meditation and prayer, and the preparation for this is non-trivial. This is really a huge amount of work, and I don't, I'm not aware that anyone knows any shortcuts in doing this. It takes decades, even for someone like Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, he didn't start preaching till he was 30. It took him a long time to go do it. If it took him that long, you can see a lot of other people aren't going to make it. And look at how long it took for the Buddha to get there, and so it goes. So there's a whole incredible number of sects and variety of techniques, rituals, art forms that are all out there developed to achieve this, that leads to meditation. And all of the different postures that you see in yoga that you can go through, and it goes on and on. It's just a huge amount of work. But the main thing is to silence the thinking mind, the thing that's going chatter, chatter, chatter all the time, and just shift the awareness from the rational to the intuitive mode of consciousness. And this silencing, to get rid of the yakking and yakking and yakking, is really achieved by concentrating on, say, a single item like your breath, or the sound of a mantra, or some sort of chant, or the visual image of a mandala, and so it goes. So there's also body movements, or walking is another way of doing this. People go through labyrinths, for example. And then you get into this, the closest thing that people can point to in sports is, for example, downhill skiing, where you just totally go into a zone and just start cruising down the hill. And you're just one with the nature all around you. You're totally focused on this, and everything just drops away. And this happens in other sports as well. So the forms of meditation are not really meant to be means for expressing the artist's ideas as ways of self-realization. The Indian music, for example, is not learned by reading notes, but by listening to the playing, how the teacher plays, and then you develop a feel for the music. Or Tai Chi movements aren't really not learned by verbal instructions, but by doing them over and over again with the teacher. Or the Japanese tea ceremonies that are these very slow ritualistic movements, and so forth. So all of these things are different ways of achieving this sort of meditation.
Did the artist that whose painting we use as our cover,
Stoddard, Richard Stoddard.
Stoddard talked about when he was, I forget if he was actually in a monastery, but he was very seriously pursuing a spiritual path. And it was actually, it's really kind of the opposite direction from the direction of meditation toward enlightenment. because you're expressing yourself rather than transcending yourself and cultivating your awareness rather than transcending it. It really became a conflict, and he had to choose whether he was going to stay on pursue the path of enlightenment or pursue his creativity. As much as he was trying to bring the two together, he ended up choosing to pursue his creativity and letting go of enlightenment in that path. Well, happy solar return, Nina.
Yep.
As we say.
Yes. The thing that when we look at Western science and people talk about how they came up with their discoveries or their insights, there seems to be just a sudden burst that this happens. They've been thinking, and all of a sudden something kicks in. The difference here is in meditation, you're actually not trying to, you're trying to function in this mode, not for a short burst, but for significant periods of time. And in fact, if you achieve enlightenment, you'll be living this way all the time. And that's a huge difference in how you go after these things. What happened here? We got out of, it doesn't want to advance. Hold on.
I have a question regarding the meditation burst versus the filling your mind with these things burst. Isn't a burst without regard to what's going on? Seems
Yeah, it is. It is.
I know that for myself, I will have these bursts when I'm sleeping or awake or meditating or doing anything. Suddenly, up pops this burst of something that I'm very happy just happened, but it can happen randomly no matter what.
Right.
You mean like it's a kind of independent phenomenon?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think you can encourage it to happen. You can make it more likely.
Well, for me, I spend a lot of time writing music and plays and things like that, whatever, different sorts of things. And so for me, frequently, I will just have a burst of a thought, and I learned from a story. This is going back to college days, that it was a story about Duke Ellington, who kept a piano next to his bed because he would dream things, and then he would roll over and play it on the piano to kind of
fix
make it
it.
real, so
Yeah.
it wouldn't disappear when he woke up, that it was there. Now I keep my phone, and I'll have a musical thought or other type of thing, and I'll just go to the phone and record it, because if I don't do it, it's gone when I wake up later, but it'll happen at any random moment for me. And I find it's very kind of jarring if I'm meditating and it happens. It's kind of a little more jarring because I'm kind of having nothing going on, and then this thing just flashes in my head. But
Right.
the net result is the same without regard to my head being full or empty. The flash is the flash for me.
Right. But the point here is that you're really pursuing, say, music and trying to create music, and you get these flashes that will get you through whatever the issue is. And the thing is that the experience of this oneness with the surrounding environment is really the main characteristic that you come up with here. It's just a sustained, not a short burst. It's just an ongoing minute by minute, hour by hour, and you achieve this oneness with the world around you, which is a whole different perception of reality. You're getting taste of it, but the argument is that this is really where you should be trying to go.
Well, they would say that the bursts are a distraction, actually.
Yeah, that what Lao Tzu said was, you're pursuing learning, so you'll learn more every day. But if you pursue Tao, then you'll decrease. You'll become aware. But is this learning? Okay, that's what he's saying is the difference here. So
I thought you were saying this in context of Western science,
right.
So that there would be some kind of concept that would have been gleaned while immersing oneself in one's scientific endeavors, while being so immersed, out bubbles up some unique thought.
Right. That's what it's saying. It's just that they're saying that if you,
Well, it's often the solution to a problem that they're looking for.
yeah,
It's a eureka moment.
Yeah, it's just, these are just different ways that you're going about it. And so, maybe if you ended up just focusing more and more on how to meditate and achieve enlightenment or this oneness with the whole world around you, maybe you just have just an ongoing burst when you're dealing with these problems that you're faced with and doing your scientific research.
But I think also you could just kind of let go of them. You don't focus on them. You don't really pay. Bruce could speak to this. I think the idea is not to pay attention to them.
Yeah.
To just, notice it, experience it, but then it just kind of flows away. It just as it came from nowhere, it goes back to nowhere. And it's a phenomenon. It's not meaningful.
Right.
I don't agree with that, but I think that's the point of view. The perspective on it is that it's a phenomena of mind and reality, but it's not really significant.
Well, I guess my confusion here, it lies with whether you're talking about a state of mind or awareness versus a solution to a problem. So if you're trying to figure out the atomic weight of an element, I don't think that's a state of mind thing. That's a solution to a question. And so I don't think having an enlightened state of mind brings you to that end. That's having an insight into how to solve a problem. It strikes me as an entirely different thing that's going on.
Right. I think if anything, they would see it as a byproduct, like an incidental byproduct, but it's not a goal. It's not, you don't pursue it.
Yeah. Bruce, do you want to say something?
You don't hold on to it.
Well, goes back to the seeing. Seeing is, in terms of the Buddhist jargon, it's pure perception. In other words, you see what's actually really there. And by the way, that sort of insight and how it arises in the mind is always spontaneous. It's not planned. You can't plan deeper realization. It has a mind of all of its own and is vast and perfect and all kinds of other wonderful things. But going back to the other thing where you're saying about different kinds of thoughts, I mean, in terms of watching the mind and watching your own experience from the inner. It's more, it's like in Buddhism, they call it realization of emptiness, which basically is where all the negatives disappear as if they never existed in the first place. And then you're in a place of incredible clarity and certainty, because your mind is not deceived by anything. It's just in a natural state and arises spontaneously all the time. And you have insight directly, moment by moment, all the time, because that's the pure perception. That's sort of the enlightenment idea, or non-duality and all that stuff. But it's a place of the mind where it sees the full depth of reality intuitively, instantly, so like that.
Right. Yeah, this example here, they're just dealing with the warrior. And so when the warrior goes into the zone, they're incredibly alert, and they're registering everything around them, and they're not distracted by anything. They're just in complete sync with everything that's going on around them. And then of course, then you get into battle coming out of this. But that's
But isn't that the origin of the monks? They came out as the warrior class. They were the people who had that training and focusing and discipline and, controlling their bodies, their body temperature. They could melt snow with their just raising their internal temperature, sitting naked in the snow. They have that control over their bodies and their minds and their brain. So,
right.
But that's where Zen and meditation came out of that discipline of the I forget what they were called, the warriors. Weren't they the predecessors, Bruce, to the monks?
Well, the idea of the warrior gives
Shinto.
you an idea of the work that you have to do. I mean, the warrior it's like the mind can be very disorientated, and difficult thoughts and all kinds of things keep on happening based on the history of the person, especially previous life traumas and all that sort of stuff. So normally there's also conditioning from society, and conditioning from the family, and there's a lot to overcome because the mind gets lost into these ideas. But in the end, what happens is that you have this spontaneous reality freedom where you see what's actually really there. And that changes everything, because the kind of lost into this, that, and the other no longer exists. What you see is what's been there forever already, which is well, the biggest experience of it. It's full of vast love mind, a lot of vast compassion, that sort of thing. So it's a very different kind of experience because it's always complete, and it's.
So you're not striving to do anything the way an artist is.
That's right. It's not the striving part anymore. It's what happens after you do the striving.
Right.
But even then, it doesn't come from the striving. It comes from a deeper place in your own mind that has been there forever.
Right. So you really, in that sense, with that goal, you want to let go of the striving. It's
No, it disappears. You don't let go of it. It just disappears on its own.
Okay.
Like the deeper heart mind realization, it just finds that it just moves into the deeper reality all on its own, because that's where the realization comes from, not from what you've done or practiced. It's from what you kind of, in a sense, discover what's been there all along.
Right.
And it's what's been there all along is reality. So it's effortless, incredibly clarity and so on. So that's kind of what they talk about, that everyone has Buddha nature. So you're finding out what that Buddha nature is. And when the mind returns to what's actually normal, which is Buddha nature mind, everything else disappears.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm confused about something regarding that state of mind. And that is to say that I have no trouble visiting the idea of gaining that level of awareness and being totally empathetic and at one with the universe and all things good and wonderful. But how does that meld with just day-to-day existence, such as I need to put food on the table or find shelter or create, whatever it be it art or something material? How does that state of mind assist me in solving the problems that I have? I don't think, when Einstein came up with E equals mc squared, was it because he was at a state of oneness with the universe and that thought, came to him, or was he working on solving a problem and somehow transcended whatever it was to be able to come up with a solution? It seems like there are two different things going on.
Okay, so in a sense, yeah, one still has to struggle with the outer universe. You just get better at it. But in a sense, the other way of looking at it is that everyone has a journey from their own Buddha nature. Like there's a deeper reality in everyone that's advancing and moving closer to realizing their true nature, which is, well, in simple terms, it's just simply reality of heart, mind, say, or something like that. Big, it's really a major experience. So everyone's on a journey to expand their deeper mind, and you can't see it that way because you're kind of lost into this, that, and the other. But the underlying reality is that, in a sense, from my own experiences, everyone has this vast heart mind, and they're all trying to get back to it, or discover it the first time. But in fact, they don't discover it at all. It's just simply been there all along.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm just gonna skip ahead. This is more of the same of this. You're in this zone, is what they're trying to describe here, and the similarity between this meditative state and the frame of mind of the warrior is just shows up again and again. We saw this briefly in the Bhagavad Gita, which was actually a huge battle there, and that was a key part of the story. Was all of these people were going to get killed, but many of them were incredible warriors and were in this zone, just focusing on this. Or in Japan, the Zen Buddhist side of things influenced the samurai in the way of the warrior. And in China, they have their Tai Chi martial arts, which are slow and rhythmic, motions. So these are all just different aspects that come up in this. The thing that we keep coming back to is we're walking around this here, is that words just do not do the job. that they're abstract, they're an approximate map of reality, whatever is going on here. Einstein pointed out, as far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they're not certain. That reality is beyond what we can say with mathematics. And so it goes. So the problem we have here is trying to come to grips with it, trying to come up with some language that we can, that means we have to extend math, we have to invent more math, we have to do something to be able to bridge this gap, because what we're talking about now is not sufficient. The Eastern traditions deal with this by saying that the mystics are interested in the experience of reality and not in the description of the experience, which is really what science is in the West. It's really how things work, not why they work that way. That's what the focus is. And so they're not interested, in these things. They're really much more interested in the enlightenment, in the loss of the non-duality that you have here. And if they want to convey or communicate their experience, then they have the same issue, that they're trying to explain this in words, and we can read what the Indian mystics or the Hindu mystics have written, but words are not going to be sufficient. The one thing that we have is myth, which is the nearest approach to absolute truth that can be stated in words. So these myths convey stories, they convey images that go beyond words. And the Indians, the Hindu side of things, there's this whole pantheon of gods and goddesses that are there, and all kinds of different faces of reality. And they're really, you need this to convey the doctrines that are really this mystical experience. It's just beyond words.
Well, it's symbolic language.
Right.
I think that's the only language that can come close. Because a symbol is what, self-consciously pointing towards something else. The finger is not, the cloud or the horse.
Right.
The finger is pointing to the horse, and in symbolic language, it's very consciously making that point, that it's pointing to something else. So poetic language is really very different from literal language.
Right.
It's not even trying to achieve the same thing.
Right.
So that's one reason to study, poetry can be a mystical endeavor in and of itself. That I like. It's, to me, and that's one thing I loved about Kabbalah. It's different from just joining or melting into the oneness.
The Chinese and Japanese mystics, realize that there's a problem with words, and instead of kind of flogging this, they end up going back to very factual language. So the Taoists make use of paradoxes in order to expose the inconsistencies and show the limits that words lead you to. And the Chinese and Japanese Buddhists picked up on this, and they've developed it further. And probably the most development is in Zen Buddhism, with these koans that are nonsensical riddles used by many Zen masters to teach things. So when we go here, we see, when speech and silence are impossible, how can one pass without error? The master replied, I always remember Jiangsu in March, the cry of the partridge, the mass of fragrant flowers. So here's this koan And here you have, through this poetry, they're trying to explain that when speech and silence are impossible, how can you actually pass without error? Well, this is how they viewed it.
Right. Well, one of the famous one is, what is the sound of one hand clapping?
Right.
Right.
Right. Well,
Right.
It's sort of like if you could figure out what that means, well, this is a sign that you found it.
Right.
So using concepts is a good way of communicating with somebody who has had a similar experience. So the sound of one hand,
yeah, you know every word. You know, here we have leaves falling, lie on one another, the rain beats the rain. So this is a haiku. So I know what every word means, but it's the whole gestalt, the whole, how you put the whole thing together that they're trying to convey here. You know, what's going on? What is really the nature of life here? And this is they just try different ways of doing this, myths and symbols and poetic images, or these paradoxes like a one hand clapping. You know, they're just trying to get across that words don't do the job.
But they point to things.
Right.
Yeah, but there's still a huge difference. I mean, the real understand of the one hand clapping just indicates a nonverbal realization, and you're trying to communicate to somebody what it's like. Like the sound of one hand clapping is, for me, is the nature of union. And the nature of union, you can't explain, can't even begin to understand it until you actually experience it. So I look at these concepts as I was trying to point to it, you know.
Right. Here they went back to an example from physics. When you deal with the dance of the god Shiva. Shiva is dancing all over the place, an incredible dance. To some physicists, this actually captures some of the notion of what they call quantum field theory, which is the behavior of electromagnetism when you get down to these atomic scales of things. There's a dance of the particles and the waves that takes place, which is very much akin to what the dance of Shiva is. So they're both the creation of the mind, and the models end up describing an intuition of reality, but neither of them does the job. They're pointers to what's going on, but they don't go all the way there. You have to still go experience it.
No, only in the direct experience you actually experience what it really is, and then there's no doubt at all. You just there's a certainty and direct. You know, you just see what is already pure perception. You know what it is instantly. It's like, and the mind already knows that it knows.
Right.
So it's a very different reality altogether, and it's always entirely beyond concept because you can't even start to go there. But if you want to try and communicate it with somebody who's actually had a similar experience, they'll say, oh yeah, I know what that is.
Right. So this has been going on now for over 100 years in physics, where they've realized that when they tried to describe having both a wave, some entity that was quote unquote a particle, but also was a wave. So it's a wavicle, or you know, what is it? You know, there is no word to describe this. Okay, and the reality that's there, really, again, words, ordinary language cannot do the job. So with that, we're going to go you know, and just give you two examples here. The physicist Werner Heisenberg said the most difficult problem concerning the use of language arrives in the scale of the very small, the atomic scale, the quantum level where things are discrete. And we don't have any simple guide for correlating the mathematical symbols with concepts of ordinary language. The only thing that we know from the start is that our common sense concepts cannot be applied to the structure of the atom. Just as a simple example, you have these electrons running around the nucleus of the atom. Well, why don't they spiral in and hit the nucleus? The nucleus is positive and the electrons are negative. Why don't they smash into it? Just to start there, you know, you're dead in the water. The other chap, D.T. Suzuki, with Buddhism, said the contradiction is so puzzling to the ordinary way of thinking that comes from the fact we have to use language to communicate our inner experience when its very nature transcends language, transcends linguistics. You know, and so we have these two people, one writing about atomic physics and the other about Buddhism, and the passages are virtually identical. There's, you know, words do not do the job. One final thing that we haven't touched on here, I just added this, is that what you see today in physics or in philosophy or in art is there's some sort of phenomena called emergence, when there's an entity that's observed to have properties that its parts don't have on their own, properties or behaviors which emerge only when the parts interact in a wilder whole one another. So one example of this is the phenomenon of life. We start off with say dirt, and from this we make Adam's rib, and all of a sudden the inert earth becomes alive. So life is an emergent property of chemistry. That is, biology emerges out of chemistry for some types of materials that are now animated, and we say they're plants and they're animals and so forth. Or in the psyche, there's many phenomena there that emerge from underlying neurobiological processes that just weren't obvious before. The simplest one that I like is just, if you've ever taken a class in statistics, you end up with dealing with something called the central limit theorem, where you start to look at adding up different random events, random numbers, and if you scale them appropriately and you get more and more of these things, you end up with a bell-shaped distribution here. The bell-shaped distribution just emerges out of this, you know, complete chaos. You know, like where did this bell-shaped distribution come from? Yet it's central to, you know, describing you know, lots of phenomena that are out there. And so this is one thing to keep in mind, the notion of emergent phenomena. And then we have what are called fundamental building blocks that make up these theories. So just the things that are fundamental are atoms, but atoms that make up the cells and the materials all around us. And then if we step back and look at the atoms that we called were fundamental, actually, they're made up of components, electrons and nuclei. But we can talk about those in a different way than we talk about the cells and the materials that are there. We can look at the nuclei in more detail, and they're made up of protons and neutrons. The protons and neutrons are themselves made up of these quarks, and the quarks are made up of the subquarks. So we have a hierarchy here of these things, of fundamental building blocks, but out of it, we get a theory that is going to be able to describe all of this phenomenon. And that's what the search is for some sort of emergent theory that we haven't got there yet. And it's going to require some very capable people to go deal with that. I mentioned Ron Cowan several times, and Ron wrote 3 books that are cited here. You can find these on Amazon. I'm pretty sure. And I thought they were all very well written, and Bruce is the custodian of these things. I think whatever royalties there are, Bruce monitors them. So I
Yeah.
encourage you to go look at them and see. You know, he tried to capture his observations. You can see here. This is a picture of one of these subquarks that Ron was observing, that also Leadbeater and Besson observed. So, you know, and this is the future of Buddhism as science, which up here has a different wrinkle on it, different picture on the cover. So anyway, that's it. Let me get out of this. And any other thoughts, any questions?
I have a question to you, Marjorie. Hi, by the way.
Hi, welcome back, Stephen. We missed you.
I was curious about what you said about how you said something like you were, rather than the merging it to the oneness, you were into you said a few minutes ago you were talking about I guess your mystical experience with you know, I guess rather than Jewish oneness. Is that, you know, I couldn't quite grasp what you were talking about there. And
Well, there's in Kabbalah, you can talk about, it's of course it's hard to explain. What I like is that it's not just looking at the unity of everything, and what I think of as this kind of amoebic oneness, where it's just this kind of mayonnaise, you know, it's just this blob of oneness. It's looking at, Buddhists talk about the one and the many, you know, and the multiplicity. And what I like about Western mysticism is that it's encouraging this sense of wonder at the multiplicity, at the complexity, and the differentiation, because things are both ways. Yes, there is this all-encompassing, all-unifying oneness, but before you get there, there's all the quarks on the way. There's all the atoms on the way. There's all the cells and the activity of life, the sheer the divisions, to me, are fascinating. And I guess so I'm kind of after that sense of wonder at the differentiation and the variety of it all, rather than, but I don't think Buddhists really preclude that, but I think they think it's a distraction. So you tell me if I'm wrong on that, Bruce.
Well, the thing is, it's sort of the actual, when you the difference between concepts and pure perception is that in pure perception, when you perceive like an element of reality, it's
without the filter, right? The filter of the mind.
No, it's not a filter. It's just so beyond anything that you can even begin to explain at all. But so then you kind of narrow it down so you can talk about it, you know, or talk to a friend about who's having a similar experience. So you're talking about using concepts to describe something that's absolutely beyond any concepts whatsoever. So and the fantastic, beautiful things, especially when it comes to heart mind. It's so mind-boggling, blows your socks right off. It's awesome stuff. So how can you talk about that? Well, you don't.
The other thing that comes up in the Yoga Sutras is that for example, these special skills, these CDs that, Ron had developed with his clairvoyance. So they said, or the ability to levitate, or the, ability to see into the realms of space, all of these things. They said,
so like a guru who manifests jewels in their hands and things like that.
These things are like interesting parlor tricks, but they're not really the point. Bruce is dealing with the real point, which is to focus on the non-duality, on the actual world that is really around you, that you're missing, that you think you're seeing, but you're not really seeing. And rather than focus on, for example, looking like Ron Cowan did, looking down into the atom and seeing these things, why don't you focus more on trying to become more enlightened and experience the passion, the compassion, and the incredible amount of love that you'll get out of that. That's they're different sides of the same thing.
It's very complicated.
Yeah, and it's very dynamic too. It's it's not static by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, it's always advancing, it's always going deeper. It's a moving dynamic that is beyond anything you could imagine, so spectacular. But that's also normal. And it arises effortlessly and stuff like that. So it's just a natural mind. You just feel normal.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it isn't at all, of course. Then it blows you away.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that's part of it. Everyone has that as their own natural mind. It's what's really there.
Yeah. And I mean, and Jesus of Nazareth said, why do you look outside? It's the kingdom of heaven is within you.
That's right.
What's your problem? So